Hello, welcome to episode 151 of the series where I am programming an NES game live on Twitch from scratch. Let's get started. So, oh, you found your keys. Well, that's good. So you came here asking for your keys last stream, and now you found them. Obviously not here. So in the last stream, we implemented a quick little additional feature where we could adjust the camera speed. And one thing that I realized was that I might want to change the speed relative to the current speed, and then I was thinking maybe we could do it over time. But what I want to do here is I want to just change this real quick before we start on level 1 and really building that, because what I realized is I want the counter to actually be essentially an offset, so whatever the current camera counter is, either add a value to it or subtract a value to it. We can worry about duration later. So obviously changing this, we got to change the code in the export tools. Let's do that. Let me close these quick actions so I can see the chat better up above. Okay, so this can go away. This can go away. We're going to change this offset to, I'm going to change it to 4, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another one. I'm going to call it adjust to. I'm going to make this a negative 4, so it should slow down and then it should speed up. So I'll just kind of move that there. We need to make sure that the -4 gets exported in 2's complement and actually works properly when we do the add, so that we get a subtraction essentially rather than an addition. I think it will without much actual work, but we'll see. So let's camera counter and counter offset. We'll leave duration. It doesn't matter because we're not using it right now, but we can leave it in case we decide we're going to add it. Alright, so oops. One of these days I will actually make this export in a way that I don't have to manually copy. But for now, it's just easier to do it this way rather than adding additional work and steps to the tool. Oh, whoa, where did that window go? Okay, that was weird. And code, and let's build. Hello. There it is. We'll also eventually have to fix the title screen that got broken somehow. And all this. Actually, I don't need these on anymore. I was listening to the audio on the headphones to make sure that it sounded good, but I think we're good. Thanks to the feedback from MDTA UK. All right. So We saw that it slowed down. Well, and it slowed down even more. So, alright, my guess is that this is probably because this is coming in as a negative, which is then being forced into a positive. But let's see. So that's a uint. So that's just stripping the negative value. So what I want to do... Oh, what I want to do is I want to just make this an int 8. And then we'll do that cast there, and that should fix it. It should come out with the right value now. All right. Alright, so it slowed down. And slow down again. Okay, let's take a look at what it's actually storing in here, because what I thought was going to happen did not. So counter limit is set to 4 the first time. Oh, that's weird. Why did that happen? So, result. Range exception at memory location. Throws a range exception if the value does not fit into the result variable. Okay, so it's trying to do the conversion. Int 8. What is actually in that JSON file? Oh, map 1. So it is a -4. Counter limit is a... Huh. Does it not work with negative numbers? That would be pretty weird. Oh no, get out of here. Microsoft. You know, I get it. If you didn't do this, there are some people that still, after all these years, would not restart the computer. I understand. And while that is important, it is important that people, you know, restart their computers so that you can install whatever nonsense update that you need to install. Let's see, what is it that it needs to install so badly that it's interrupted my work? Cumulative update for Windows 10 version 2.1H1 for x64 based systems. And a printer driver. Okay. So, I get it. I really do. But it's also really annoying to have this happen in the middle of when I'm working on things. And I know you try to do it outside of normal work hours, but you also interrupt everything that I'm doing by popping up that message to let me know that you're going to do it outside of normal work hours. It just aggravates me, and I wish you would just let me do it when I want to do it, and not when you tell me that you think it should be done. Because it's my computer, not yours. But here we are. Alright, so before we were so rudely interrupted, convert signed to unsigned. Why are you converting from a signed to an unsigned? Tell me. Because as far as I can tell, I'm passing an int 8 to this, and the value is a -4, which should fit into an int 8. It's not unsigned. Let's do this. Let's get it as a string and confirm that it's reading it properly and not doing something weird. It may not be happy about that because it's not a string in the JSON, but that's okay. We will take our chances to see. So that's the first one, and that's the second one, and that gives the range error result. Type ID of T, P holder type, return extract, convert result. What is CC? CC. It's not what I wanted it to be. So is this just broken for negative numbers? Is it because the type is a type def? It shouldn't matter. Nope. All right. Not sure why it's doing this. We're gonna do this the old-fashioned way. And of course, we want to cast this to be an int 8 so that it doesn't complain that we're using an integer and passing it to an int 8. Did it complain about that at all? Ignoring these other warnings. 1520. No. Okay. So it seems like that should work. So S value is 4. Counter limit is now 4. Great. S value is -4. Counter limit is -4. FC, that looks correct to me. Yeah. All right, so that should be written out now as a -4 in 2's complement. So after all of that, let's take the exported content, copy it over. Let's rebuild this sucker. And get this running. Okay. So I think... Alright, so it slowed down there. It should speed up again in a moment. if this worked finally. Oh no, wait. I said it when we were talking, and then I didn't do it. So, store A into camera counter speed. That is incorrect. I mean, it's correct, sort of, but not really. Store A camera counter speed. Where are you? No. Camera counter. Oh, shoot. What was it? Yeah, that is it. So, where is that code? Store, load A1, store it into there. Load A camera counter, blah, 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 blah. Compare to this. Load A, store A. Decrement, load A. Is it in another? Oh, right. It's in process. It's in the map. Sorry, the camera thingy, the camera adjust process. So we load the data and then we just store it here, but what we actually want to do is we want to load a camera counter, clear carry, add with carry that. All right, so that should do that. Hey Matt, I use my Python much. I wrote all my pipelines, similar to stuff you're doing in Python for the first time. Usually I use C++ and C#, and it's been wonderful. I have not. I haven't used Python much, and I mean I've used it. I built a little weather station using an e-ink display, and the SDK is all Python based. I've resisted Python a little bit just because I really don't like the meaningful spaces. I don't know why. I guess from working in C and C++ for so long, it just bothers me that the spaces actually mean something, and it just throws me off, and it's just me being stubborn. But yeah, I know people really seem to love Python and using it for this kind of stuff. All right, load a camera counter, right? And then I'm going to clear, and then I'm going to add this. Oh. And then I gotta store it. If I don't store it, it should be this. It should be this. If I don't store it, it doesn't do anything. Yeah, I mean, well, I'll give it a shot. I guess I'll give it a shot. I just, it is, and it's not even that I just like don't want to change. It's more so just, I don't know, just inherently being against that stuff in Python. Because I don't mind working with different tools that I've never worked with before. It's fine, but that's one thing I just have weird stubbornness about. I don't know. Yeah, okay, cool. So it slowed down and sped up, and then so that's what I wanted. So now we can use positive and negative offsets for the camera speed, and now we can get rid of that so we don't have to worry about that for now. All right. So now we get to the part that I kind of suck at. So like I was joking about on Twitter when I posted that I was streaming, I can do development kind of all day long, and even complex stuff if I need to. I can kind of work my way through. I don't know if I ever showed it here. I don't know. it's not really relevant. I've worked on stuff in 3D before, and learned the 3D math. Although it's been a while, so I'd have to refresh my memory on it. But to be able to do a true game in 3D with all the different matrices that are required for the different transforms on your 3D objects and moving through 3D space, and it was a very limited game because it was something we were building ourselves, and the mechanics behind it were pretty simple, but nonetheless, it's all I'm getting at is the technical side of this stuff is relatively straightforward for me. It's not necessarily easy, but I can get it. The game design stuff, not so much. That's really fuzzy. It's hard to get a grasp on, and so when I see people pumping out games, even little games, where they have really solid mechanics in them, I kind of like take a step back and wonder how they manage to do that. So that said, don't expect anything super brilliant here, but we're going to learn together as we build this. So the first thing that I think the level needs to have is, I mentioned this before, the beginning of the level. Let's say this is the end of the level. I think the ship should come out, and I like how is it Life Force? No, Crisis Force, right? Is that the game? Like how that game, the ship kind of flies out of the bottom. That's not specific to that game. I've seen that in other games too, but I like that. I like the idea of having sort of in a rock face, you have the hangar that the ship is, in, and it's going to come out of there, and it's going to fly over the water. So here's our ship. And then the idea, I think, is that we would have a large portion of the beginning of the level be over the water to start off. The speed should be pretty quick because the idea is you're relatively low to the ground. And then you're going to have different enemies kind of starting from there, barring your way. And then as you progress, at some point you will, I think the idea would be we would hit a point where we would transition to, I'm not sure how we would want to do this. If we would want to transition to city. So we have the graphics, for the shoreline and some of the buildings, stuff like that. We could do that in the beginning here. We can have the shoreline, and you fly over, and again, more enemies attacking. And then potentially we do some sort of altitude change and go up higher, switching to sort of the smaller graphics that we don't have right now of being over a shoreline, and then ultimately getting to some sort of boss fight at the end, right? Like that's a pretty simple pretty simple level, and at pretty much every shooter, you traverse a level and then there's a boss at the end. If you're looking for examples, there are Exevious Maps on. Okay, let's take a look. Thank you for sharing that. So here's Exevious. Let's take a look at Area 1. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's... They're long, so obviously... they're not going to look, oh man, Chrome doing the soft scrolling, but yeah, so similar idea in that you're just kind of scrolling up over some land here, and at some point you're going to get, I guess, over here, and there's a boss. I haven't played Exevious, so I don't really know. I assume the boss is like right there. Exevious. Why is this... Come on. Holy Christmas, this is not behaving itself. Come on, Chrome. Yeah, the altitude shift was something I wanted to do from the very beginning. I just thought it would be like a really neat way of differentiating the game from some other shmups that are out there. I know that there are other games that have, especially on 3D systems, they make use of the different planes. You know, so if you look at like a game like Ikaruga, yeah, to be fair, I'm not a shooter expert, so I can't say if this is unique or not. It just feels like a cool way to do it, especially with an older system like the NES. On something that's newer where you have 3D, you know, you could pretty easily, I think, put together, you know, a model of what you're trying to do, you know, what we're trying to do here, and fly over it and, you know, swap in high and low detailed models and textures as you're changing, and then, you know, only model, like if you're going to be close in here, then you only model this part, and if you're going to be higher up, you're going to have to model out more because it's going to be exposed to the player as they are you know, going higher up. But I don't know, maybe there are other 2D games that do that. I mean, so like looking at these maps, yeah, I mean, they're just kind of outlining like a region of something. Buildings would be simplified at a higher altitude. Yeah, so exactly. So like if we go to the tile sets here, like, you know, this building, which is pretty detailed in the tile set that Jordan gave me, you know, would be just like a tiny gray block with some of the blue in there just to kind of give the hint of what it is. So yeah, so this is the world. Oh, I see. So this is like all of those maps together. Interesting. So you just so you're just like traversing different sections of the same map? Huh. Oh no, is that different? Gotta go back to the world map and look now. Let me do a side by side because I actually don't know what I'm looking at here. Alright, let's take a look. So, Area 4 was kind of cool looking. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's just this section right there. So, oops, that is not what I wanted to do. So, each section is just like a strip of this map. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's an interesting way to do it. I wouldn't have necessarily thought of doing it that way. And then what does it repeat? Like that's area 16. But that also looked kind of like area 4. Oops. Yeah, so it is. It's just like shifted over. I mean, that's a good way to ensure that you're not using too many tiles, right? Because they're just kind of doing the same map over and over again with the position shifted over a little bit. And I think it would have taken me a while without having this composite map here to realize that that's what they were doing. Yeah, I know Star Soldier. E.C. Myers has streamed that quite a few times. And I know it has a sequel too, right? I think. So it's one that I'm somewhat familiar with. And like I mentioned, I think this was on the Friday stream. On the Friday stream, I also mentioned I got this Super Famicom collection, which has Star Soldier, like a port to the Super Famicom. It also has Hector 87 and Star Force. I tried Star Force and Star Soldier, and they're both very hard. But I think that's part of what people actually like about those games. So let's take a look. Does it have maps for that too? Come on. You're not working with me here. It does. Okay. So, Star Tropics, Star Trek, Star Soldier. So let's take a look at this map. Whoa, so this is really abstract. Oh yeah, I remember this level. So this is just like girders and stuff. What is that on the left? Oh, they're numbers, I see. And then stage 2. Interesting. So they're all kind of similar looking. Those faces are a little bit freaky. Let's see, stage 3. Oh, that's cool. So then they shift to like floating land masses. I didn't get this far where you can actually see the skulls and stuff. I don't think that they're in the early levels. Are they? Let's see. No, they are. I guess I was so in. Oh, but they're maybe. Oh, I see. They're bad guy things that you can shoot. I was so focused on not dying that I totally missed those. Interesting, and then you can see the power-ups are placed there on the map too. I don't know if that's actually on the background or if that's just because of the way that the background was captured. Well, so let's see. Let me go back to. Do I have the original set of? I'm sure I have them somewhere. That's the calendar screenshot that I was working on. But what is this? That's the palettes. thought I had his files here somewhere. So the other thing about doing this is I always kind of worry about it being a little bit too rambly versus the code. Like, because the code stuff is pretty straightforward. Maybe this is it. Are these just the assets? Oh, these are just the assets and he put them together. Okay. Does some allow some basic side to side? Yeah. So you're saying because of the... That's why they align. Yeah, no, I do remember some of that with the back and forth camera. I don't know that I'm going to change anything to allow for left and right. I probably am not, but all right. So like you can see here, we've got tiles that would allow us to do even more than just this background that I had gotten working on the NES for the actual screenshot that I put together. But how much do I care about it going into the city for the first level? I guess it really depends on kind of the story structure to some extent. And I think I mentioned this in one of the other streams too, but just for the sake of repeating this, I know some people hate stories in their shooters, so there will be a mode where it will skip anything story related and just go from level to level, so that you can just play it. But that will not be the default. So maybe what we'll do is we'll have it so that we're flying up the side, up the coast like this. Have some repeating buildings over here. That's the harbor that he and I had talked about for the beginning, but so the levels are going to be grouped into areas, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I can look into my notes real quick. Just give me a second to bring that up. Where are those notes? Hold on, they're just loading here. So I was thinking 6 or 7 levels. I was even thinking of that you could do them out of sequence. And the idea would be that you can kind of choose what level you want to do to kind of make it interesting. So tile sets and or palette changes between areas, perhaps. Maybe because you can change the level that you want to do to be whatever order you want. I don't know that it makes sense to try and change palettes to have it be seamless like that. Where is... Sorry, I'm just logging in here to the notes and I'm trying to grab my password. Okay. Go away. Let me see my stuff, please. Close. Hi. How come I don't see anything? I just see one page with nothing. There we go. Okay, that was a little concerning because everything was gone. All right. So yeah, so the idea was that I wanted it to start basically conceptually, if in the game the country that your ship is defending were invaded, it would start probably by trying to defend the capital city. So that was the idea. That you'd start there, and then there were several other targets. So some sort of manufacturing and mining location, potentially out in the desert. Obviously some sort of military base where enemies were attacking. Something on the coast where there's some sort of oil refinery or maybe energy production facility. Also another city, like a major port city. So those were the ideas in terms of different locations. There were a few others potentially based on how the story goes, but those are the ones that I was pretty set on. And so I think what I want to do, just to spend less time hemming and hawing about all of this, is I know that I want to start off with this section being over the water, right? So this is all over the water. Some sort of barricade defenses. Sorry, my handwriting is atrocious. And then, of course, other sort of drone flying enemies. Once we get past this section, there's going to be a section where we're flying over the city. Mostly, I think, off. Mostly we're going to be off to the coast, but maybe we'll do a section where we actually fly, where the coast comes over and we fly over the city. So that's like section 2. I think I like the idea of it being in like 3 sort of like acts, right? So like they're not really, but like you have act 1, which is over the water, and then act 2 is over the city, and then act 3 is some location where you fight the boss, and that's the end of level 1. So this is, over the city. This is going to have turret defenses firing at you. More flying drones and stuff like that. And then I think here is where we're going to do the altitude switch. Because maybe what we can do is go up higher over the land, and then even kind of make it that somehow make it seem like you went up over the city. So if you're talking about the final section of this level, then no, it would be sort of in the same area as the city. If you're talking about the game, then yes. Sort of. I mean, I'm thinking more of just like coastal defense than the actual city being a coastal city, sort of a port city, and then the boss. Maybe maybe it's the outskirts of the capital city. I don't know, but I don't know that that's 100% important right now. We can always change the backgrounds to match whatever we need to. I think the more important part is like, okay, let's get these 3 sections working, and then the enemies that go along with it. I thought some sort of barricade defense would be really cool. Something that is like a something that's like maybe a circular type thing that has, I don't know, does maybe it have some sort of like shimmering laser or something like that. I don't know if that's something you could destroy or you have to evade. I was thinking about that. I was thinking that it would be kind of maybe interesting to have a section of the map where these barricades, you know, have defined sort of sections that they block off, and the ship has to evade by flying through. Especially at higher speed, that might be interesting to do. It reminds me a lot of, and I'm sure there were many variants of this that people played in various forms, but what I remember it from is back in high school when, you know, kids were trading calculator games on like the TI-82 and 83 calculators. There was a game called, that was, at least in our version, it was just called Race. And basically you had a track, which was your screen, and then you had your little character, which was, I don't know, I think it was like just an X or something like that. And then you had characters that lined both sides, and your character would be going downward, and as you went, it would narrow in the track, and then as you played longer, it wouldn't go quite that dramatically. It would kind of randomly create a track that you had to follow using the arrow keys. So you had to, you know, go through and avoid hitting the walls, and I think it kept score, if I remember right. So anyway, the point of that is that, why is this not moving? Hi, why did you decide you're not gonna move? Okay, fine. The point of that is, like, I kind of like the idea of that there's this section that you kind of have to maneuver through, and it's a little bit twitchy beyond, you know, avoiding enemy fire. So that might be something cool to do. You know, but all of this stuff takes up space, and, you know, I'm trying to be, on the one hand, I'm trying to just explore what would be fun to do. And on the other hand, I am trying to be realistic about what can fit on an NES cartridge. I mean, I know that with the mappers and stuff like that, you can do a lot to fit content on there, especially using character RAM like we are, so we can, you know, load up new graphics as we need to, if we wanted to do something that advanced. But I also don't want to make this more complicated than it needs to be if it's still going to be fun. Yeah, color. Yeah, changing palettes obviously is an old trick for, you know, making things look like they are new, even though they are not. Some sort of palette rotation for this thing would be really cool too, to kind of give it a shimmer effect. How I would build something like that, I don't know. I am not an artist, and I would want it to look pretty decent. The other part of it is that the collision with it should be, I guess it would have to be pretty well defined. Like you'd have to say like this is the part that you can collide with. Although I guess if you collide with it from the front, so I'd have to figure out how that would work, like to give that sense of there's some depth to it. You don't want to make it that this whole thing is collidable, right? Because then that just feels weird. I mean, I guess I could, but maybe it's not like a laser beam. Maybe it's like two separate pieces that are hovering. They could be sprites, but they could also be background tiles with collisions. So like, oops. Maybe it's some sort of like dual saucer thing that has a repeated like kind of electrified pattern in here, and then we could have a few different ones that we change in and out to make it look like it's sizzling, like it's, you know, electric coming through, and then that would also be a little bit more realistic of why, like a laser just shooting up is in theory just going to be, no matter where you there wouldn't be an end to it. It would just go up straight, and at some point that would get in the way of your visibility. But this, you know, maybe has some sort of height restriction, and so you can fly around back of it. But again, from a collision perspective, that means that you only kind of collide with it over here, right? I mean, if you flew into it over here, then you would collide. Over here, you'd collide. You kind of have to get far enough back. Maybe it's not quite that far up. Maybe it's just like halfway up. Or maybe it's, I guess it's from a perspective, from a visual perspective sense, it's like this part is the collidable part, and then you could fly kind of through. Well, it depends on what height the ship is actually traveling at. It's somewhere up towards the middle of it, let's just say. Yeah, I mean, this is still just doing a bounding box to some extent. And depending on how this thing gets implemented, you know, we could do that it's two background tiles and then some sprites here, and then the collision is on the background and not the sprites. So that would be a little bit less expensive to do, because it's just checking to see if it's on the tile rather than checking against the entities that are spawned on screen. It'd be really cool to have like a sense that these are rotating, and then, like I said, you have like this almost like electrified kind of, maybe this is one tile, that's another tile, and then you have another different set that is, I shouldn't have used red for that, but hopefully you know what I mean. And then you have another set, and then you can kind of randomly swap them in and out to kind of give the sense of it changing. Would the barricades be horizontal or vertical? I mean, they're vertical in the sense of being tall from a 3D depth perspective, and you'd have a bunch of them standing next to each other, kind of to make that effect. As far as you had asked a question about like weather, I had thought about some of that, like it would be cool to have one level where as you're flying through the level, the palette's changing from like daytime to dusk, so the colors kind of shift from a daytime to like a sunset color palette. I think that would look really neat, and it's, you know, relatively straightforward to do, I think, just to kind of add some depth to the game. Oh good, another application is bothering me about something. Okay, well, sorry, Carbonite. I don't know what to tell you. Every time you do that and I check, you're fine. So, yeah, I mean, for now, I think what I'll do is kind of... I have played Star Soldier, but not on the NES. I've played it on the... I have the Super Famicom cartridge here. And yeah, I've played that a little bit. It's tough. For me anyway, it's tough. All right, so going back to what we were talking about here, so let's select tile layer, and I am going to, we're going to flood fill this out. So maybe there we go. So now, if you remember way back when, maybe you don't, there was work done to create these meta tiles based on sort of repeating patterns, and so I need to just make sure that this little wavelet thingy is at the top right, so that we don't end up introducing another meta tile accidentally. Do you plan on having an entrance animation for the ship at the start of the level? Yes, probably. I don't know 100%, but I will say on the record for now, for what that's worth, yes. Whether or not that ends up being true is anyone's guess. But yeah, probably we'll want to have it do something kind of cool to begin with. And let's get rid of this. Hi. Grab that. Do this. Why are you not? Oh, because it's all the same. Okay. So let's make sure that this didn't break anything by making those changes. I don't think it should have, but it's been a while since I've made some map changes like that. Let's see. What are we trying to see if there's anything that looks any different or problematic. It doesn't look like it, so let's replace this and build. One thing I'm tempted to try and do for the opening is use the repeat scroll capability, because I mean that's sort of what I was envisioning it for, was to be able to do some sort of repeated pattern for something like the entrance, where you have nothing but, you know, like the water here. But the sort of obvious challenge with doing something like that is that you then lose the ability to place the enemies on the map like we have here in Tiled. And so then it becomes a question of like, what is the right way to approach that problem? Is it that we kind of export an enemy list from an existing map that is going to be the same size as the repeat scrolled map, purely to have the ability to visually represent it? Aircraft carriers with weapons on, or like oil rig buildings? Both, possibly. That's at least what I'm kind of thinking right now. So, like, this is a bad tile set to use in terms of that repeat scroll section, but it is... Well, right, so I can make more use of the ocean, but like the thing is that, you know, for a section like that with the ocean, right, where, I mean, it looks good just scrolling like that with those little wavelets. It might be cool to be able to do some sort of little animation with them, maybe by cycling through, maybe have a couple different ones that are using... I don't know how you would do that without using up too many palettes, but... maybe you have a sprite that appears and does a little animation of those little wavelets here too. But my point is, you know, it's a lot of empty space essentially, right? Like this is just a lot of water that you're flying over, and I'm, you know, happy with the way that it looks, but would also not want to use up this much space on the ROM for something that is essentially just water scrolling. And if we look at this binary file, it is, you know, over 1K. So it's a lot. It's a lot for not a lot. And you know, obviously none of that is optimized. We didn't do any sort of compression on that. It is just the raw data. And at some point, I'm sure we're going to have to do something like that. But yeah, right now it's just data for each tile. The opening title is actually run length encoded. But there's issues with it right now. I think it's not even tile issues. I think it's just palette issues based on what I'm seeing here. So like, because this was working at some point and then I had changed something. I don't remember what. I don't remember what I changed that broke that. And, you know, these other colors here that we're seeing, stuff showing up with, those are just kind of because of the changes that I made. It also looks like it's not maybe clearing out the name table afterwards too. We can fix that at some point. But yeah, the title screen was run length encoded just because, like, it's got so much space, and then it has this. It's not the actual title screen. The real title screen actually looks pretty cool. And I've got it somewhere here. I had a little... I used Kasumi's really cool... utility for just converting the animation that Jordan put together for the title screen, and it looks really nice. Let me see if I've got that here, just because it's cool to show it off. It's like you see that and then you feel kind of good about like where this is going. I think it's on my desktop. all these pictures of my dog that I was using early on to convert. What is it? Let's see if I've got these here. Yeah. I think this is right. Yeah, so it's missing the bottom part, but I thought this looked awesome. This is more or less what the title screen will look like. So this was put together. Jordan put this together. He worked it out so that it'll actually work on the NES, and used Kasumi's tool to be able to generate the animation properly in Sprite, to then be able to convert it so that we can see, what it would really look like. And I love the little particle effects that he managed to get working. It's really cool. So the title is not fully rendered here because of some of the stuff that's not that I didn't do correctly here. But yeah, so that's the real title screen. Anyway, going back to this, yeah, I'm thinking we probably just want to do something where the repeat scroll sections don't use any background information. They just take the object layer and based on how many times it repeats, it'll know where it is in the quote-unquote map, and then spawn enemies accordingly, just like it would with the normal map. I mean, yeah, you could do that, right? You could just do the speed lines like in anime, but I mean, again, I didn't do that. I mean, that's a good idea in terms of like special effects and stuff, but I didn't do that for that purpose. I had done it purely for for use with to save space, right? So that when we needed a map that was actually detailed and had a lot of content, we could build that. And then when we had a section like the ocean or flying over the desert or something like that, where you would not necessarily need to plan out everything tile by tile, we could use that instead. But yeah, for like, leaving a section of a level, that could definitely work. Or some sort of part of like a cutscene or something like that. So we should have fewer enemies spawning now. Okay. So I think... Where are we at here? An hour and 16 minutes. If I made a new map for the repeat scroll section, or could I just extract it from here and use that as an example? That might be the better option. Let's take a look at what's in that map. So we've got a few different layers. This is obviously all the tiles that we're using in that map. But then we have the objects layer here. And this is the part that I'm interested in for repeat scroll. So So this just grabs the map based on this type. Do I actually look at that at all beyond just like the basics? I don't remember. I just get the array for layout. And this would be the first level object. Could even probably add something like just so it's clear what it is. I think the idea that I had was, if I remember right, that it would have an array of these things, and so like you'd have repeat scroll as one type and map as another. So let's go in that direction, because I think that was what I was intending to do originally, and it does make sense to do. So we're saying, okay, this is a repeat section. There is still going to be a map name, which we can call ocean1.json. And that's just going to be, like I said, it's literally just going to be, I don't know that we need to do this here. We could probably break this out into that. I don't think I actually look at the scroll speed at all right now. That's fine. We'll fix that at some point. Alright, so yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to break out that like there's this type thing called repeat, which is going to use ocean1.json, and that's going to be a map here that effectively will look like this, but the background stuff doesn't matter. What will matter is, I guess we have to figure out how to define the tile set that it's going to repeat. But more importantly right now is that I just want it to pick up the object layer and export that. And that would get exported. So the nice thing about that is that should export pretty small. If you look, like, this is 41 bytes. This is the representation of all the objects on this map. So yeah, it's like basically 10 bytes per thing. I don't know why it's 41, but oh, it's probably 41 because there's an additional byte of that is the count in the beginning, right? Yeah, so there's the initial byte that says how big it is, and then 4 objects at 10 bytes apiece. Simple. Okay. So that's obviously going to be a lot smaller than trying to load this whole map like this, because we're really talking about the repeat scrolling background tile just being dumped in constantly, and 40 bytes of data for the whatever we're putting on the map. So objects are 10 bytes. Why? Let's see. Good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I will tell you shortly. So it looks like Trying to find the code where we do the actual export here. Okay, so it's 10 bytes because we will export the entity ID. So the thing that it is, the X position, the Y position. The Y position is 2 bytes because it's a location that is global to the map, so it needs more than 1 byte to store it. 255 won't cut it. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Whether or not it's actually visible, because there are things like the spawn points where the enemies just pop in at the top of the screen. Those are not visible, so that's 5 bytes here. The sprite ID of the thing that it might spawn, if it's spawning something, that's 6. The entity ID of the thing that it's spawning, assuming that it's spawning anything, that's 7. How many things it's spawning, that's 8. And again, that's assuming it's actually spawning anything, and that's 9. Where's the 10th byte coming from? Did I miss one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Where'd my 10th byte come from? Oh, here it is. This export. Yeah, so it's either an export ID or just an empty 0. So yeah, 1 and then 9 bytes down here. So that's why that entity is 10. And we could do something where we if we needed to save space, we could say, okay, if it's not something that's spawning a thing, right? It's just a sprite that's going to show up on screen. Then we don't need. All we need is visible, and we don't need any of this other stuff. We might need the sprite ID, but we don't need this other stuff, and we could not include those bytes. And then we would just have to change the logic in the assembler code to look at that and determine if it then needs to continue to read bytes or not. I mean, you're talking about how many bytes here? 1, 2, 3 bytes per object. Not a whole lot, but if you've got, 50 objects on screen, I guess it's 150 bytes times a bunch of maps. Wastes the space a little bit. Could you have some objects be smaller, like the speed and palette triggers? Yeah, I mean, basically that's what I'm getting at here, because some of these values are reused. So in the union, like spawn entity ID is actually palette number 3. So we couldn't keep this one out, but we could keep out, a few different other ones that we are referencing only under certain conditions. So that would save us a few bytes for each object. Speed palette trigger objects only need a Y value also. Yeah, that's true. But then you get into micro optimizations that I don't know are necessary right now. Like, we're still just trying to figure out how to get our levels composed. Might we need to save 150 bytes? Yeah, and then we'll do that kind of optimization at some point. But there's also the fact that we could be doing this in BNROM or something like that, where we have 512K of storage, and we're just bank switching. Each level gets a bank, or something like that. Or 2 levels get a bank, and then you have 32K or 16K per level. And that's a lot of space, based on what we're doing. Objects and enemies in Zelda 2 or 3 bytes. Yeah, I mean, again, I could optimize this pretty tightly if I needed to, but I don't know. I'm just not there yet. You know, and in Zelda 2, I guess what would you need to know? You would need to know what kind of thing it is, what the X coordinate is. I guess you don't really need to know what the Y coordinate is other than, right? Because like you just need to know whether or not it's showing up when you're scrolling into screen. I don't know what the other bytes might be, but again, you know, like I doubt that they started off building Zelda 2 being like, okay, enemies need to be 3 bytes. They might have come into it with that experience from having built other NES games that, you know, they knew that they needed to make them small to conserve space, knowing that at some point they're going to be fighting for every byte. Like that's what Felipe was saying in a comment that he mentioned that I talked about in the last episode, that, you know, you're going to need to save space. And yeah, okay, I probably will, but you know, we can evaluate that as we get to it. It might be that, you know, for the levels and stuff, that's really not a concern. And then if we wanted to have some of the cutscenes or you know, whatever additional art we want, that could be in separate banks where, you know, it has no bearing on the levels. I don't know. I mean, you know, to that extent, I'm not building a game in NROM like they did with Micromages, where, you know, like that it is a technically impressive feat, like that they did that they went through that painful process of really cutting down things. But I can't remember off the top of my head, but I feel like, you know, they tried to do their best to build what they wanted, and then as they saw how much space they had left, they then, you know, optimized and re-optimized things. You know, there were certain things that they knew they couldn't just be wasteful on, so they tried to target those early on, but I don't think they were as heavily optimizing at first as they ended up in the end. I could be wrong, but you know, that's my sense. X, Y, and ID. Okay, I mean, yeah, that, or X, Y, ID and size. I mean, that makes sense. That those are like, that's like the bare minimum you need to know, because I mean, so that's the thing. Like you could implicitly in the entity definition say, okay, the thing is invisible, so I don't have to store visibility, right? Like these are the kinds of optimizations you end up doing, right? Where you're like, okay, I don't need to store this for every single spawn point that I've got on the map, right? Like if I have 10 of those, that's 10 bytes I'm wasting identifying that they're not visible when every spawn point is not visible. So what's the deal with that? But you know, there are other things that are not going to be. I can't omit that the, you know, what the spawn point is actually spawning is. Maybe the sprite ID I can omit and have that be tied again to the entity itself, so that we can, you know, say, well, okay, so this spawn entity always uses this sprite, so there's no point in identifying that each time there's a second byte we get to save. I need to know the count every time. We could say that it's not adjustable, the delay for the spawning, that it always spawns at the same rate, which, you know, we might end up doing, but it also could be boring to have that. It might be fun to be able to have spawn points spawn certain things faster in certain locations than in others. So, you know, but if we said we didn't want to do that, then, you know, that's a third byte we can cut out of it. So, but again, like all of this stuff is optimization. We're talking about, you know, before we've actually built a real level and like played the game and really understood what it is that the game is about, from a game mechanic perspective. And a size of 13 or 14 does custom things. Yeah, I believe that. Object type, trigger, spawner, projectile, collider, non-collider, something like that. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm all for optimization, but I also don't want to spend like the next 5 streams, you know, kind of optimizing each byte out of every possible location. And then, you know, yeah, okay, our objects are that much more efficient and we've saved 30 bytes here, but, you know, I feel like that time is better spent building levels. Zelda 2 probably closer to a full ROM than mini. Yeah, I mean, Zelda 1 also had some pretty high compression from what I recall. I wanted to... Do I have this? There's a cool utility that... was it Shiru wrote? I think it's Shiru's. And I'm pretty sure I've used this here before too, but if not, let's take a look. Just since we're talking about size here. Where is... I know I've got it here somewhere. It's just a matter of remembering what it's actually called. I'm pretty sure it's oh yeah, NES SP? Is that it? Yeah, this is it. So this you load your ROM and it'll tell you based on your mapper how much space you've used. So we've got about 4K free in the first bank, and all the rest of our other banks are free of our 4 total 16K banks. So part of that is, you know, we have our character ROM loaded into the program ROM because we're using character RAM. So there is no character ROM per se. So that's where some of the space is being consumed. And that was a choice I made based on the fact that I wanted to be able to be flexible about how we loaded content to provide some visual variety. If we look at, let's pick a game, any game. I'm sure I've got some ROMs here that we could look at. Data, is it on the data drive? I think it is. If we look at, you know, most decent Nintendo games make pretty good use of the space they have. Probably because, not because it was any mark of quality, but like it was just like the games were, it was too expensive to waste space. But, you know, then you look at Zelda here, and here's, you know, it's using a decent chunk of its space, and it also uses character RAM, so, you know, it's using a decent chunk of its space there. Zelda 2, so it's got its character RAM. It's got a decent amount of program ROM still left in those banks, but, you know, there's also to consider, like, there are problems and challenges with having to jump around to different banks as you're working on your code. Zelda was also a port from Famicom discs. Yes, it was. There are a set number of room types with flags that can be uniquely set for them. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, Bank 7 is fully filled, and the character ROM looks like it's also pretty full. I don't want to do this too much longer, but let's look at Blaster Master. Look at Blaster Master. Holy Christmas. Blaster Master really packed it in there. I mean, and that game is huge, so I believe that. I don't know. I think this tool is relatively accurate. I don't know that it. I don't know that it's 100% accurate, but I know it's pretty accurate. So, Mega Man, Mega Man 3 looks like it maybe could have been. Looks like it's fragmented a little bit. Like if you've ever done, if you ever did disk defrag on old PCs, that's what it reminds me of. Like there's a lot of like blank spaces in there that maybe could have been used to tighten up stuff. Castlevania. All right, we won't do this. I don't know if I have Castlevania. Oh, you know what? I might have it on Dropbox if this will find it. Do I have it in there? I don't have it in there. Let's look at a homebrew. Let's look at Nebs and Debs. Nebs and Debs fully utilizing all of its space and its 2 banks and character RAM. That's a good game. If you haven't played that game, you should. Micro Mages, also an excellent game. Also using NROM and using every little bit of space there and its character ROM. Yeah. I don't really have anything else. We don't need to go into this too much. I have a ROM of Castlevania somewhere. I don't have it. Wait, maybe I do. When it was... Yeah, let's see if I had it on here. There you go. Here's Castlevania. It's using character RAM, as you mentioned. Pretty packed in there. Castlevania 2, not so much. 2, almost completely empty banks. What is this? The bosses at Konami would have been furious if they knew. Castlevania 3, on the other hand, holy cow, that game also packing it in. So this only has, this is 8 banks. This has, is that right? It's got 9 banks? Or maybe that's just how many it's, oh, it's got 16 banks, is that right? For Mapper 5? I guess it's possible. But whatever, it's the banks that it's using are full to capacity. So anyway, my point is, these are finished games. They obviously had to optimize the heck out of. I imagine like the teams working on Castlevania had a hard time fitting everything. I've got space. I can add more banks. I can reduce the size of things here. I think we're okay for now. With the free space in Zelda 2's non-7 banks, I wonder if the branching could just be replaced with JSR. Not knowing enough about that code. The branching could be... Well... It could be a couple of things. JSR, I think, has the same... Oh, maybe it doesn't. No. I was going to say it has the same problems like the other 6502 opcodes for conditional branching, but I think it doesn't. If we do, let's see, branch carry clear. So these are all relative 2-byte, right? And then JSR, that's a jump with an absolute address, so it's not relative. So that, yeah, I mean that, I'm not sure how that would. I'm not sure. I'm like not familiar enough with that code to know. It's possible what you're saying is true. I don't know. Yeah, so stuff can be moved around, and so like definitely not optimizing the level doesn't help. Um, this character ROM could probably be moved further down in the bank so it doesn't get in the way of the program ROM, but at the same point, that's just literally the place that it's putting it because of the way that I created. Where is it? There is a place where, oh, it's this whole, so game char, right? So, no, stop. What are you doing? So if you look at this, where is this? Oh, it's literally just because this is the place I put it. Like we could do something where we tell it, to shift it down towards the bottom to open up space. It doesn't really matter. It's really nothing. There's nothing really that would improve. Like I said, we could, keep the level separated out into different banks. You got to remember though that the code that operates on the level data has to be in the same bank as the actual data, or it doesn't have to be, but it there may be problems if it isn't, just in terms of having to swap back and forth between banks in a timely fashion. I mean, I could see it probably working, but also seems completely unnecessary. So, like, the code that is used to process the scrolling would probably be replicated across each bank to avoid having to swap between banks, if we distributed the level data across these three banks. So that's a little bit of wasted space by doing that, but at the same time, it's 16K. It's a decent amount of space. Anybody else who's on here who maybe has a little bit more experience with optimizing on the NES, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on what I've been rambling on, but who knows? I mean, the cost of swapping the banks speed-wise is not much. Like it's really the cost of executing the instructions required to tell the mapper to swap banks, and I believe it's the actual swap is pretty much instantaneous. It can be just a write to an address, but sometimes I think it takes multiple. I don't remember with this mapper if it's multiple writes or if one is sufficient, but it's generally not expensive to do the swaps. Where you run into problems is, let's say you're processing something in one bank and then you want to use a subroutine that's in another bank, then you either have to swap back to do it, or you will have a problem when you go to try and execute code that doesn't exist in that bank. I know that is sometimes a problem, that causes bugs in games while they're in development. I wish I had a concrete example, but I know I've heard of, like, I'm pretty sure Nathan Tolbert said that he had a bug with that, with maybe Halcyon, where he was seeing that, and it was trying to call something that was another bank without swapping to the other bank. I could be making that up, but yeah, it's a problem, because the address is whatever the address is, but the subroutine is in the other bank, so you're just calling into random data essentially. That's why generally, like, you have your code replicated across the banks, and they have to be aligned across the banks so that you can call them without having to worry about it. That's like the simple way. Otherwise, you got to swap back and forth, which just gets complex in terms of like managing that code. Name table mirroring. Yeah. So going back to, I think I'm going to wrap this soon, but let's go back to this level definition here. So we have the repeat scrolling here. We have what it's going to be doing for the repeat scrolling. What we didn't do is we didn't define what it's going to be repeat scrolling, and then also how many times. So like the count would be, I forget how we do it in the actual assembler code. Load level. I think it just skip row process. Set new row update. Load new tile row. After updating the index, start seeing the attribute updates. That is all fine. I'm just trying to think how does this actually, if I remember right, what it does is it just adds, I just tell it like a fake camera position, and then it just keeps filling in the same tiles until the camera reaches the bottom. Yep, so camera compares 0, branch equals blah blah blah, proceed with map, blah 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 blah. Jump skip row process. If this is proceed with map render, load background mode, compare it to repeat scroll. Skip row process. Alright, so it checks the camera here to see if it hits 0, and if it does, then if it did, branch of equal to 0. Alright, so it checks to see, okay, so it just says, okay, here we are, did we hit 0? If we did, then compare what the map mode is and then swap to the opposite one. This obviously has to change to actually look at what the sort of layout is in this file. And then the count really is, we can convert it. We can say, instead of it being just a Y position that gets set when we go into repeat scroll mode, you know, I can just say, well, I want this to be 10 screens long. We still don't have a good way of defining what the actual repeated tile is. I'll have to think about that and see what we actually want to do for that. And then we also need to export this data in such a way that the game can actually see it, because right now it is, I believe, just kind of hard-coded loading the map. So what it needs to do now is it needs to have like a, needs to export the data for like here are the levels, and then, you know, here are the pieces of the levels that we're gonna do, and then it's gonna say, okay, the first one is a repeat scroll, and the camera position starts at whatever it starts at. It's got to fill the screen with those tiles, and then That'll be new because we don't do that right now with repeat scroll. We do that with loading the map because we know that if you're starting with a map screen, we need to pre-populate the screen when you first come on because you're not scrolling into it, you're just coming onto the screen. So we'll have to implement that too. Let me make note of this. So need to export the map layout data, including the levels and the information about the type of map segments that make up the levels. Repeat scroll does not currently support pre-filling screen on load like we support with maps. I will make a note of the discussions we had about the optimizations with data. Just so we capture it here, because I don't generally go back and listen to the videos, but I do want to make sure that that's captured here. So Sprite Export, Entity Export can be optimized to reduce the number of bytes depending on the type of the exported entity and some assumptions that can be made based on the type. For example, visible can always be directly linked to the entity, since it's unlikely we will have visible and non-visible versions of the same entity. All right, so where is word wrap? Okay, so that captures that a little bit. Need to export the map layout data, including the levels and the information about the type of map segments that make up the level. Repeat scroll does not currently support pre-filling. So yeah, so then let's see what else would need to happen there. So let's capture this so I remember this too. Export of a repeat scrolling level simply exports the object file with the entities on the object layer, not any of the actual map tile data. How do we determine the map tiles, meta tiles used for repeat scroll mode? Oh no, don't worry about it. I don't mind you asking questions or commenting on the size. And for sure, at some point we're going to run into a situation where it's like, do we really want to use the amount of space we're using, or could we optimize it and and be more efficient with our data so that we have fewer banks and potentially have a smaller board? That may or may not be necessary or even a problem, because I know, like, at some point I saw Paul from Infinite NES Lives using, I think he's trying to put together a board that is essentially kind of like universal, where it can work. It has one flash chip for both prog-ROM and character ROM. And the mapper is programmable, so it doesn't matter what you're doing with it. So, like, there'd be a lot of space on there and a lot of capabilities. But if there's a reason we would not want to do that or use that, like maybe we find that it is more expensive to produce that, then it would be to come up with something that's a little bit more efficient. Then maybe we do that. I don't know. Is there a reason to have fewer banks? Can you have 16? I I don't remember the limitation on the number of banks. I mean, really, the only reason you would want to optimize on space is twofold. One is, you might be able to get better pricing on parts to some extent, although at this point it's like you're not going to find anything that's 32K, right? Like everything is so large, so the flash might actually be like 512 or a megabyte or something like that, and then the mapper is the limitation on what it supports. But like BNROM, so BNROM technically supports up to, well, it's saying it could support 512K or even 8 megabytes. And each bank is 32K. And let's see, the bank select is what? It's just these 2 bits. See, if it's only 2 bits, then 0, 1, 2, 3. It's only 4 banks. So 512K. I mean, yeah, so four banks of 32K is 128K. I'm not sure how it supports 512K. Maybe there's something. Maybe there's. Oh, it's because of the variance. Optimization is more of a think about it now before finding yourself rewriting. Yeah, I mean, I understand why you'd want to think about optimization, but at the same point, it's like I don't want to spend so much time thinking about optimization that I never get into the actual level design. So that's really all it is. I'm just trying to be careful about not over-engineering things any more than I may have already done. So let's see here. I don't know why the formatting here is a little bit wonky. So MMC3, I forget how this works. At some point I had it working, but yeah, 8 meg would be a lot of banks. But like so that's part of what, I don't know if you guys have seen the Franken Graphics is working on a game with something Nerdy Studios, and they are building their game using a ROM, using a mapper that supports hundreds of megabytes. So if you think about it, it's just a bunch of banks that they're swapping back and forth between, and their mapper supports setting however many banks they have to be able to do what they're doing. So yeah, so there's some, it's interesting to think about that and what the capabilities are. If you have that, why is this formatting all screwed up? That's so weird. But let's see, I'm trying to find anything interesting about like the number of, so like this is 16K fixed with 16K mappable. So like the idea would be that you'd force all of your fixed stuff into 16K, and then you'd bank switch your other stuff that's not as important out and in, so you don't have to worry about the problem I mentioned before. Let's go look at MMC5 for a second. But yeah, so like this is 128K also. Oh, that's the program RAM. The ROM has 120, so about a megabyte of size there. And let's see, what do you do to swap banks? So there's different modes. There's 8K switchable program RAM bank, with 32K switchable program ROM banks. So you could load snippets of code into RAM, I guess, and or decompress stuff into RAM and then, you know, run it or do whatever you need to do. It looks like it has similar kind of capabilities with the character capabilities. This is what, 8K switchable program RAM, another 8K of either ROM or RAM, another 8K of ROM or RAM, another 8K of ROM or RAM. So like you can dice up the storage in a bunch of different ways with this mapper. The one that people in the homebrew community liked to use a lot, I mean they still do, is GT-ROM. It's pretty simple. It's got 512K of storage and a 32K window, and you've got your 4 bits here for selecting your ROM banks. It's got you've got character RAM. You've got 16K of it's character RAM, right? Yeah, you've got two 16K character RAM, two 8K character RAM banks for a total of 16K. So this is like very straightforward to program with, which is part of what makes it nice. The fact that you have to use character RAM makes it a little more complex, because that means you got to load up your character data yourself rather than it just being in the ROM and just being there right at start. So anyway, that was all a very good aside, but balance of total space you have, the simplicity of swapping banks, and what other features remember. Right. I mean, like, all of this is going to kind of work itself out as we build things. So I've recorded these questions that need to be answered as we move forward. That's an open question. These are sort of to-do things that need to be done. Yeah. So I think I'm gonna wrap. As always, thank you for watching. And if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at Clearvis. I am at Clearvis on Discord, but also I am on Video Game Sage as Xelius, Xelius. That's also my email, xelius@gmail.com. If you want to email me, obviously these recordings have been posted on YouTube, and I will continue to do that. The streams will, I'm going to try and keep doing them Monday and Thursday at 8. Hopefully that time works well. As life happens, I will obviously be adjusting the schedule accordingly. I will try to actually remember to remind people and post when I'm streaming. I was like, oh right, today's Monday, I have to stream. Still getting back into the swing of things, but also trying not to be too regimented about it. If I'm just feeling like tired or something, because I don't want to get burned out from the streaming. I do want to obviously work on this and make as much progress as possible. So, I do want to keep doing this, and part of that is not getting too into it being rote and exhausting in terms of the schedule, and being unrelenting with the schedule like I had been in the past. So yeah, and then if you have any questions, please definitely reach out to me. I got this really nice comment that somebody made on one of the videos recently that they had started programming as a kid with some of the stuff that's out there. I'm trying to think of now what they mentioned. Like, I think it's Code.io, something like that. But anyway, but like it was really nice, and they were talking about how the assembly language zero-page video was great and helped them understand it really well. And I appreciate that people are still watching these. But if you have any questions about them, as good as they are, they don't cover everything, and so I'm happy to answer as quickly as possible. Usually within a day of them being within a day of the comment or question being posted. I owe Richard Baldwin response to his question. I just remembered that. So anyway, I'm rambling. I do have a Patreon, and I do have a Buy Me a Coffee. If you're so inclined, it's totally unnecessary. That's just something I've set up because people have asked, but certainly appreciate it if you want to. And I will see you next time. Have a great evening, and see you Thursday.